Muirne, I'm just going to read the introduction here. It is said that Muirne's father, Taig MacNuath, didn't want her to marry her lover, Cool, who was the leader of the Fianna of Ireland. That was because he was afraid of losing his white mansion on the Hill of Allen if she took a husband he did not choose. So when Muirne went with Cool, Taig looked to the High King Con Cédonach for help, saying that Cool had stolen his daughter. As a result, Cool was killed in the Battle of Nucna and Gull Morna took over the leadership of the Fianna, the one-eyed Gull Morna, they say. After Cool's death, Myrna discovered she was pregnant, and when her son Demna was born, she knew his life would be in danger as the leadership of the Fianna was his inheritance. So she gave him into the care of her husband's sister Boval and warrior woman Leah Lucra, who took Demna into hiding. And then just a little bit here on the artistic license that I have called upon for this story. According to Dáithí Ó the one-eyed Gull Morna was an emanation of Balor of the Evil Eye, the father of Etna, who also had to part with her child Lugh for fear of him being killed. Here I have used artistic license and given Ethna to Myrna as a mother, because their stories have so many similarities. Very often in Irish mythology, it's hard to find a mother, as identities are given by naming only a father. Throughout this story, Myrna chants prayers to her mother, invoking her help so that she would have a different outcome. I have named this story Tenim Leda. Its meaning is a chant or method of divination. It also means to break the pith, like a skin of an orange, to get to its essence. So this story is called Tenim Leda. No one believed that I heard him die, that I could hear his last roar over the mayhem on that day. Who knows the roar of one man over another? They asked. I did. I knew his voice above flying javelins, the clashing of swords, the thundering hooves. I knew how his mouth would have fallen when he took his last breath. I walked over bodies to find him, to close his eyes, to say goodbye to my husband, Cool of the Sons of Bashna, leader of the Fianna of Ireland, dead in my arms, while I, Myrna, was left with his child, taking root like a little tree in my womb. I found him. I could see he had struck the man who lay beneath him. Two enemies grotesquely entwined. Two men with wives and homes no different to each other. Two boys who were once the wonders of their mother's hearts. It had been in my mind that he would lift me up, swing me around with joy when I told him his child was in my belly. I told him then for what it was worth. I held his dead face in my hands and said, Cool, I have our child. And as I said it, my body stiffened, chilled to the core, because I saw my mother's face looking for me, looking for and finding me. Mother, I do not want your story. I had gone with Cool from my father's house willingly. It had been said that I was stolen by him. I was not. I went away from the house of my father, Taig MacNuath, because I loved the man who was accused of being my captor. He was more like my saviour than my captor. There had been no happiness for me since my mother Ethna had gone to the island of apples. My mother would have known that Taig had no intention of losing a daughter to her own notions. She would have known he would want to keep me in thrall until he found someone of his own choosing, some rich lord, good for his prosperity. I wonder if she would have stopped me from going with Cool. Would I have listened to her? I went with Cool, not knowing that my father would start the battle that killed the leader of the Fianna, my love and father of my child. One-eyed Gull Morna took his place and was jubilant. His thirst for power defeated any grief he might have had for his leader. That was a blow, because the Fianna were known to be loyal and loving to each other, and so I knew I must be careful. It would not be happy news to Gull that Cool's beloved widow would bear a child who would contest him. I also knew my father would seek to kill my child for the same reason. I was sure of that because it was my mother's story waiting for me if I walked into it blindly. I whispered, Mother, I promise he will not take my child. It was Boval, my husband's sister, and her great friend, the warrior woman Leah Lucra, who took my baby to safety as soon as he was born. It was so hard for me to agree to that, but I knew it was right. So in secret I bore a beautiful boy, and I gave him the name Demna, my little stag. I loved his name. It was precious to me because it was all I ever gave him, except for heaving him into the world along with my invocations and my sacrifice, so he would have a chance to fulfill his destiny. Then, while my breasts were still full of his milk, they took him to the heights of Slieve Bloom. That was a good place to keep watch over comings and goings. He is my beautiful boy, I said, as Bovill and Leah took him far away from me with tears streaming down my face. I fell to my knees to hold on to my breaking heart. He was gone, and I was emptied of all that was good that had been mine for such a short and precious time. I cursed the men who had brought such loss upon me that day, and I wondered about the use of women's curses. I whispered, Mother, please, help me to make mine a different story. Bovill and Leah were good to Demna and continued sending me news of him whenever they could. Leah taught him to swim when he was only a baby. She said, I threw him into the water and up he came swimming like a little fish. They said he was a wonder child for doing all he did so young. They told me he brought down a duck with a dart on his first hunting trip. They said he left no hair in the fields by running as fast as them. They told me of his growing, his pink cheeks and his hair as fair as the sun. Hearing about his hair struck fiercely into my heart, and I thought of my fair-haired mother, who had lost her children too. I whispered, Mother, his hair is your hair. Mother, I see you loving him, and I cry. I continued to hear from the women who said the spirit of wisdom was living all around him. Sometimes he spoke of fire in the water. It was because of his fire talk they sent him off with the travelling poets. They let him go, knowing the poets would shave his head and reduce his wants up in the hard mountains and valleys as they travelled through the dreams of Ireland. However, his time with the poets was interrupted by a marauder who killed them all. And for what? I don't know. The only danger those men had in them were the fires in their souls. The murderer's name was Fionn, who had at least a shred of scruple left in him when he spared my little boy. So Demna made his way back to the women who, because of their intuitions, were already out looking for him. They found him, and on their way home, Demna brought down a deer. So for a while after that, Leah could rest, because they had their own little hunter. They watched him intensely, and they were right, because danger lurked on every bend. Gulmac Muirne knew there was a son of Cool living, but he didn't know where. He had only one task on his mind, that was to kill him. I whispered, Mother, keep him high in your mind. After a time, Demna left the woman to go on his travels alone, sometimes meeting others, eating and playing with them, often beating them at their own games. His hair grew again, beautiful and fair as the sun. He went to Loch Lane, the lake of learning, and there went into the service of the king of Fintraw. The king said to him, if Cool had a son, you would be him. So Demna left there for fear of being discovered by Gull. He came to me in Kerry, where I was married again to the king of a small kingdom. My husband was happy to put the boy into service until he saw that he was uncommonly good at the game of chess. Who are you? He asked. Demna said he was the son of a farmer, but my husband saw the look in his eyes that is in my own when I am lying. He knew then he was my son, and so the son of Cool. He banished him because he didn't want the child to be murdered in his kingdom. That day I lamented that I was not like Bovill and Leah, who had learned to fight and hunt. All I could do was make curses to float around with all the other women's curses, finding their way into some but rarely reaching their intended target. Everyone was afraid of Gull, except for the brave women that were Bovill and Leah Lucra. Demna travelled on alone, a little wiser and learning quickly, and as I saw him walk away, I was afraid my heart was nearly finished. Again I whispered, Mother, his hair is your hair. Mother, when you remember your children, remember mine. My mother Ethna had borne 3 children against the will of her one-eyed father. 2 of them were thrown into the sea. Only one, called Lou, escaped because he was saved by a woman of the She called Birog of the Mountain. Birog took him to his father's people, the Tuatha Dé Danann. Then a prophecy was fulfilled when Lou became the slayer of his one-eyed grandfather. I whispered again, Mother, his hair is your hair. Hold him high in your mind. On one of his journeys, Demna met with an old hag whose face was smeared with blood from kissing her beloved son lying murdered in her arms. Through her agony, she told him about the fierce fighting man who had killed him. And so Demna chased and slew the man. After that, he came back to the woman to soothe her as she keened. That was when she told him, that man was the one who gave your father Cool his first wound in the battle where he died. It is good that you've killed him and robbed him, because there among his belongings lies a bag of treasure that belongs to you. It is made from the skin of the beauty Ifan ni Delbaith, who was changed into the shape of a crane by Lucra the Arctic, who was jealous because Aoife had won the love of Ilbrec, and she had not. Ilbrec was Manannan's son. It was a bitter spell she wrought, and now all that is left of that love story is that crane bag, holding all the treasures that were dear to Manannan MacLear. So take it now to your old Uncle Crimmel. He is the right one to have it. Tell him there are sacred words for everything inside it, that he will only find when the tides are close to the shores. When the tides retreat, the bag will be empty. She told him all that as if she was hearing it from somewhere other than her own mind. And then in the same vein she said, when you are done with that, go find the poet Finnegas, who has been sitting beside Bowen, the river goddess, for the last 7 years. He has been looking for the wisdom of the salmon that has eaten 9 hazelnuts from the hazel tree at the bottom of the ocean. That is where you will find the wisdom of the earth and heavens combined. Demna thanked the old hag, knowing it was his fate to have met her. I whispered, Mother, he has your hair, your magic, and your prayer. After Demna delivered the crane bag to his old Uncle Crimmel, he came to Finnegas just as he had caught the great salmon of wisdom. Finnegas told Demna he was happy to see him and teach him. His first task was to watch that salmon as it was roasting on the spit, but he warned, at all costs, do not eat it. Demna obeyed as he turned the fish on the spit. But as he turned the fish on the spit, a blister appeared. He reached without thought to burst the hot blister. Ouch, he said, and he put his thumb into his mouth. When Finnegas heard him, he looked for reassurance that Demna hadn't eaten the fish. No, I did not, said Demna, still sucking his sore thumb. But didn't the skin on the fish blister, burning my thumb when I burst it? Finnegas realized then that the wisdom was not meant for him. It was for this boy who had travelled so far in his young life. It was then that the great poet renamed my son and gave him the name Fionn, because of the golden lightness of his hair and the wisdom of the earth and the sea inside him. I whispered, Mother, he is named after your hair. I see you smiling. Thank you for your prayer. It was after that he went to Tara at Samhain, to the haunted feast that was held there every year. There was a great condition held over that feast, that all grudges were to be put aside. It was the perfect night for Fionn to come unknown to the High King to offer his service and tell him who he was. The king accepted his service happily because he had great regard for his father Cool. He invited the boy to sit down with the Fianna, but before doing so, Fionn told the king the words that were flying around like birds in his head. It is when the grudge is put aside, the night will come alive and fire. The king spoke. The boy is right. For 9 years now, on this very night, a man whose name is Ailin creeps into our company. With him he brings a magical harp that puts us all to sleep. Then when our heads hit the table, he burns Tara down around us. There's a man among you who can remain awake and stop the burning. I will give him whatever inheritance he is due, big or small, there and then. Fionn knew his task was his. Fionn knew the task was his. As he stood up to tell the king he would stand awake to meet the foe, the company laughed. The king accepted with a smile on his face that was kind enough to allow the boy the strength of his convictions. Then, encouraged by the king's entertainment of the boy's belief in himself, a man called Fiacha came to Fionn and gave him a special sword that had never had a wrong cast. He accepted, and just as the music of the magical harp began, he saw the company fall, one by one, into a fateful sleep. Fionn pressed the sword against his forehead to give himself pain, and that way he remained awake and was able to quench the fire Ailinn had started. When the company awoke, they saw Ailinn chased out by a boy not yet fully grown into manhood. Up and down and over the hills he ran, with surprise and terror at the boy who was full of his own wonder. With his task completed, Fionn returned to Tara with the head of Ailinn under his arm. It was on that morning that my son became the leader of the Fianna of Ireland. His birthright was to lead a band of warriors who would always be outside the world of Norman society. Men who would always hold the dreams of Ireland alive in their hearts, their code of honour binding them so that no warrior could ever hold a grudge against another. Fionn's leadership was rooted in that code, and so I whispered, "Mother, he has your hair. You held him high in your mind. Mother, he is there."